Welcome to the first ever AVNC Flood Workshop. My name is Jeff Yana and I'll be moderating today's event. Just a few program notes. Due to our limited time, we want to keep the discussion focused solely on the subject of today's talk. As you know, the LA River is a complicated topic, and so for this reason we won't be discussing or taking questions about quality of life issues impacting the river, whether it's homelessness, trash, or crime, nor will we be talking about the river habitat or environment. So today we're just going to focus strictly on the river's role as a flood control channel. The objective of today's talk is really to firstly inform and prepare our stakeholders ahead of the likely adoption of the city's proposed special flood hazard area map. That's really going to be the focus of today's talk. And secondly, to raise awareness about the ever-increasing risk of a catastrophic flooding event along the LA River. A little bit about today's format. We're going to be starting off with two brief presentations by members of the AVNC River Committee, followed by a short Q&A session. And so we're asking people to hold their questions until the end of the presentations. After the Q&A session, our friends from Ryland, which is Ready Your LA Neighborhood, will be screening a short intro video about their organization. After that, we'll break out into various information tables staffed by our workshop participants, where attendees can get more detailed information about the NFIP or National Flood Insurance Program, other programs and resources. So the first presenter today is Karen Barnett. She will talk briefly about the river history and potential special flood hazard area designation. And the second presenter is Anthony Forrester. He'll focus on risk analysis, flood preparedness, loss prevention, and flood insurance options available through FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. All of this information is, the information is from today's presentation is culled from a variety of sources, including publications, materials, and resources provided by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the City of Los Angeles, and the LA County Master Plan. Additional materials have been provided by FEMA and the NFIP publications. The information provided here is publicly available. We will post links for the information and more on our RSVP page after today's event. So, some introductions. Our first presenter, Karen Barnett, she is a current member of the AVNC board and a longtime chair of the LA River Committee. She's an avid river enthusiast and tireless LA River advocate. Our second presenter, Anthony Forrester, is also a current board member and River Committee member. By day, he's a commercial insurance industry professional with extensive underwriting experience in the flood insurance market. As for myself, I'm a former board member and current River Committee member. So without further ado, I will turn the mic over to our first presenter, Karen.
Hi and welcome everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So before we get started, we had a couple of questions. One is that how many people here received the city's potential special flood hazard area notice in 2016? Just a few. How many of you received our door hanger? Okay. Okay.
Door hanger? The doorknob hanger?
Yeah, the door hanger. Okay. So a bit of background on me and this workshop. I moved to Atwater Village in 2002, and in 2008 I got a letter from my mortgage holder saying that I was in a flood risk hazard area, and that high special flood hazard insurance was required. So due to the cost of the lender's provided policy, I had 30 days to figure out what the heck to do. Because no one had ever said anything about risk when I bought my place, and I never got a notice or anything of that nature. So during that research, I found out about the FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program and got a policy at half the cost. So in 2014, I was actually removed from this designation through a letter of map amendment. So as the city's process progresses, we'll come back and talk about what options there are in the future, but you know, there are things that we can do as a community to make a difference. The LA River hasn't flooded in our area since the 1930s. The slide on the top right, or actually it's left, is Griffith Park in North Atwater Village. That storm, the 1938 storm, was said to be a 50-year storm. And in response to that storm, the Army Corps and other agencies channelized the river, created new flood control dams and debris basins. While we haven't experienced flooding, there have been events which have come close. In January 1969, the waters came close to the top, as you can see from this famous picture of Los Feliz Bridge. This storm was said to be a 50-year storm. While we haven't experienced floods, there have been events which have come close. Here are two pictures from the same bridge, Los Feliz Bridge, one in 2017 and 2019. Of course, they didn't top the levees, but the February 2nd storm was said to be a 2-year storm, and there was approximately 2 inches of rain which fell in a 24-hour period. So as you can see, that the water comes very close to the top. How we got to this potential flood hazard area. The knowledge of increased flood risk comes from the Arbor study, also known as Alternative 20. In this 11-mile study, there was a hydrology section, which noted a loss of volume in the channel of about 50%. The channel had been compromised by a buildup of sediment and vegetation over the years. This is the beginning of the timeline for our purposes here today. The knowledge of this loss of volume required that FEMA contact the city, required that the Army Corps contact FEMA. So then the city and the Army Corps delved deeper into the flood issue with the floodplain analysis, floodplain special study, which was completed in 2016. During that time, the HESCO barriers were erected to protect Atwater Village and Elysian Valley during the El Nino rain prediction. After the floodplain study, the city put out those special flood hazard area notices and held a meeting on October 17th in 2016. The resulting reef mapping process, which we are now in, was started in April 2017 when the city sent a letter of requesting map revision. So that's where we are, and from what we understand, the process may take 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. So there really is no hard date to when this will go down, so to speak. The HESCO barriers remain in Atwater Village for protection. They're not meant to be a permanent solution, but they do offer 20 to 25-year protection versus 4 to 7, depending where you are located in Atwater Village. And to our knowledge, there is no plan to remove them at this point. Our rainfall is erratic, as you can see from this historical chart. If history holds true and we add in climate change, we are due for a big storm in our near future. I'm going to hand it off to Anthony now.
Nice. Right. So, thank you all for coming out. I just want to reiterate something that Jeff said. I do have experience in insurance, but I am not a personal lines insurance agent, okay? If you have insurance for yourselves, your homes, your best option is talk to your agent about your specific needs. We're going to provide information about flood insurance and about the flood hazard, but I'm speaking from my experience in the insurance industry, but I do not have expertise exactly in homeowners insurance. I just want to kind of caveat that. The best resource is your own insurance agent, okay? So, let's talk about flood zones, all right? The language can be a little confusing. I'm going to do my best to explain it. You start off with a Zone A. That is the high-risk flood zone, all right? It's also referred to as a 100-year zone. Some of you may have heard that if you've been listening to the radio lately. We've been talking about that. A 100-year zone is the high-risk flood zone. And what that means, and we'll get into more detail about this, there's a 1% chance in any given year of this flood event happening, okay? And we'll talk about what that event might be. There are a few different types of high-risk flood zones. Zone AE provides an elevation for the flood water, so it'll tell you with some specificity the depth of the water you might expect, all right? There are some zones where everywhere in the zone is assumed to be 1 to 3 feet of water. So wherever you are in that A zone is 1 to 3 feet. There are some zones that don't give a flood depth. So you're told that you're in a high hazard flood zone, but you're not told how deep that water might be. And then there are some flood zones that are related to wave action. So those are typically coastal areas, not really what we're talking about, but that's just another type of high hazard flood zone. Then there's the Zone B, or moderate risk flood zone. It's also known as the 500-year flood zone, or 500-year event. And then there's Zone X, which is where most of Atwater Village is today, which is the low hazard flood zone, or zone of minimal risk, greater than 500-year event, greater than 0.2% chance of a flood occurring. You'll notice that the chance is not zero. And in fact, 25 to 30% of flood losses in the United States happen outside of a high hazard flood zone. So just because you're not in the flood zone doesn't mean that you are somehow protected and exempt from flood. Confusingly, Zone X, also known as Zone C, or rather Zone B, is also known as Zone X, but it's Zone X shaded. It's a confusing nomenclature. I don't know why they do it, but Zone X is where we're at. Zone X shaded is as a moderate hazard flood zone. And then there's Zone D, which is unknown. Modeling hasn't been done by the Army Corps. The flood hazard may exist, but we don't know. And this table here has been included kind of to convert kind of what we call the recurrence interval, or the year event, into the probability of it happening in any given year, right? So our 100-year event, which is kind of the line between moderate hazard and high hazard, right, is 1 in 100, 1% event. 1 in 500 is 0.2%. And then you can get down here, 1 in 5, a 5-year event, is a 20% chance of that happening in any given year, right? When Karen referred to a 2-year event, every year there's a 50% chance of that amount of rain and that amount of flow through the river occurring. And we're going to use the term 100-year flood quite frequently. And as I said, it doesn't mean that if a flood happens, we're good for another 100 years. It means that every year that chance exists, a 1% chance exists of that event. And what constitutes a 100-year event can change over time due to urbanization and climate change. What that event, how severe that event is, can change. So here's our flood map as it exists today. If you go to the FEMA website, look up your address, you'll likely see this map for your flood zone. As you can see, I put a box around here, the 1% annual chance of flood discharge contained in channel. And that shading, that blue shading, is supposed to be over the river. So, per this map, the 100-year event should be contained in the channel. We'll talk about whether or not that's true, I suppose, in just a moment. Bodies of water on these maps are always shown in blue shading because there's always water in it, so technically it's always flooding. If you looked at the Silver Lake Reservoir, you'd see that that was also blue as a Zone A flood, but of course that's just because it's full of water. So we're all in this Zone X, less than 2% chance of flood, with the expectation that the 100-year event will be contained completely in the channel. As Karen mentioned, there was modeling done by the Army Corps of Engineers. This map right here is from North Atwater. We have the map for South Atwater in just a moment. The lighter blue coloring, it may be hard to see the legend over there, but the lighter blue coloring, or rather the darker blue coloring, is 1 to 2 feet of water depth, while the yellow, the pale yellow, is 10 to 15 feet of water depth in that area. All right, we'll provide links to these maps so you can see them more clearly with better coloration. And these are done with mathematical models that take into account the flow through the river for different probabilities, the carrying capacity of the river, which we will show you in just a moment, and also the topography, the peaks and valleys in our neighborhood, the topography of the land, okay? And now this is Central and South Atwater with the flood depth coloration. You can see, of course, the river going through there. So I'm going to take a moment just to kind of give you an example of how these percent events and water depths work, right? So let's say we just pick any point on this map that is expected to have a 5-foot depth of water in a 100-year event, okay? So that's one specific probability with one specific depth of water, right? 5 feet. And there's a 1% chance of that every year. So here we are standing here on night, there's a 1% chance I'm gonna get this much water. There may be a 0.5% chance, or a less than 1% chance it's gonna be even worse, right? There's gonna be more water. And that probability exists. And then there's maybe a 10% chance that the water will only get 2 or 3 feet high. And that probability exists all the time due to the nature, of this river hazard. Now, because the river is actually designed to carry a 50-year event, if you get that 10-year event, water's gonna stay in the river. 20-year event, it stays in the river. 50-year event, that water is just lapping at the top of the river banks, the top of those levees. In a more severe event, you're gonna have water overtopping. And then in that 50-year plus event, you're gonna see water start to build up in the areas around the river. And then in that 100-year event, it's going to get, presumably, per the models, to these depths. If it was a 1,000-year event, the water may be deeper than this reflects. So we said we were going to take questions at the end, but I just wanted to pause. Is what I'm saying making sense? Do you understand kind of how this severity versus frequency works when it comes to the flood water in our river? Are there any questions specific? Yes, Karen?
I'm not sure why they use these terms, 100-year, 10-year, et cetera. It seems to me that it should be gauging how much rain in a certain period of time. That would make it a little easier. Is there a
Well, it's not just rain. It's not just rain that we're talking about, right? So the 1938 flood was a combination of rain and heavy snow melt. So 10 inches of rain may be carried perfectly well by the channel, but if there was significant snows that year and the temperatures had risen significantly, you're going to have more drainage in our area that's going to flow into these channels. Plus, development over time has put concrete where forest used to be, and that water has nowhere to go into the ground. It goes into our flood control channels. Okay, so it's not a strict correlation from the amount of rain that falls to the severity of these storms. There are other factors as well. Where the rain falls, just because it's falling on our heads doesn't mean it's going to necessarily, if it's falling in the mountains and flowing down into our flood control channels, it could also lead to this 100-year event. So, yeah.
But interestingly enough, in the 70 or whatever years since the river has been into a flood channel, I don't remember this.
This is true?
There have been 2 modules and no reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a question, but.
Fact.
Well, that is a fact. We haven't had a 100-year event. All right, we've had a 50-year event, and that is what the river was designed to carry. So, anyways, hopefully we have an understanding now of this 100-year terminology as it relates to the potential severity of a flood event. So I'll move on from there. So this table right here shows the carrying capacity of our river at various points in cubic feet per second. That's how much water will flow through the channel. This only represents what's called the Glendale Narrows area, which is the 11-mile stretch that Karen referenced. Atwater reaches Karen, is it 3A?
Yeah, the middle, 3A to 6A.
3A to 6A reflects our stretch of the river here at Atwater Village. Okay. This pre-improvement number is before the HESCO barriers were put in. And as you can see, it ranges from a 4-year event to a 7-year event. That's how much water can be carried in the river. It was designed to carry 50-year event. But with the vegetation and without the HESCO barriers, a 4-year event is about a 25% chance that the water will overtop the banks in that particular reach, which is up towards the top where the curve of the river is. A 7-year event, I can't do the math off the top of my head, but it's certainly less than a 1% chance in a given year. The barriers, with the vegetation, the barriers increase the carrying capacity to about a 25-year event. That's a 4% chance of overtopping the banks. Okay? So this illustrates kind of where we're at, right, where we could be. The best it could be is 51 year to be exact. That's what the river was designed for. It was never designed to carry a 100-year. But with vegetation, without those barriers, it's 4 to 7 years. A 4 to 7 year event could overtop the banks. So, What does this mean to the residents? Besides the fact that there exists the danger of flooding, if you live in a high-risk zone and your mortgage is federally backed by the government, you will be required to buy flood insurance by your mortgage holder. I'm not sure if private lenders also require it. It may be within their purview to say you're in a flood zone, please protect our investment and buy flood insurance, but I'm not sure the answer to that. This right here, this number here, 874 parcels in the city of Los Angeles are currently considered in a 100-year flood zone. It goes over 3,000. 3,075 parcels will be in a high hazard flood zone if and when these maps take effect. And several of those, as you saw, are here in our community along the river. Okay, so there's a flood. How bad could it be? Well, this is how bad. Sorry. Jumped ahead here. So this, sorry. Yeah.
Could you move the microphone a little?
Am I not projecting well enough? I'm sorry, I thought I was.
You have a lovely strong voice.
Well, now I'm gonna have to be more quiet. So this table right here shows the estimated monetary damages in the event of a flood. This is provided by FEMA. And as you can see, as little as an inch of water can cause tens of thousands of dollars in flood damage. And some areas in that map could get 5 to 10 feet of water. For reference, the average flood claim in 2017 in the United States was $90,000. That was the average in 2017. And that's all across the United States, not specific to our flood situation, but that just gives you an idea. And also I'll recall that 30% of floods happen outside of a high hazard zone. And just to give you some background, there are different models for flood damage. This particular example table was for a 2,500 square foot house with $50,000 worth of personal property. So there's a home and then there's also the personal property values that come into play. And I just take a moment now to think of your home and the things that are sitting on the floor of your house, your furniture, other belongings, electronics, clothing, things like that, and how much damage an inch to a foot of water could potentially do to those items. So, you've had all the bad news, flood and all that, so now how can we protect ourselves from the damage and loss that comes with the flood? Well, one way is with flood insurance. How many of you have homeowners or renters insurance right now? How many of you think that flood is protected and you're covered in your homeowners? No? That's very smart, because it is not. Flood is not covered in homeowners or renters insurance. But let's start with the definition of what flood is. It's on the handout, so you can read it. I'll just touch on a couple of the points. It's a general condition and a temporary condition of water inundation. And what I think would be our situation, the overflow of inland waters, right? So we're talking about the river carrying too much water and overflowing its banks. But also, the unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff water. Even if you're out of the flood zone, if your local storm drains are blocked up and water starts collecting in the street and infiltrates into your property, that is also a consideration of flood loss. So homeowners and renters insurance does not cover flood, but the National Flood Insurance Program was created for just that reason. It's administered and backed by the federal government, and its purpose is to offer affordable flood insurance in participating communities, of which the city of Los Angeles is a community that participates in the NFIP. It was created in 1968, and we'll talk about what is available. So the amount of coverage you can get is reflected in this table right here. If you live in a single-family home or a home with 1 to 4 units, you can purchase up to $250,000 worth of coverage for your building, and up to $100,000 for coverage for your personal effects. If you want more insurance than that, if you feel you need more, there are places you can go. It's just that's as much as the NFIP will offer. Private insurers will cover pretty much whatever you want. It may be possible to buy less insurance than these limits if that's what you feel you need. If you're in a building with more than 4 units, clearly the limits go up, and that general insurance is available to businesses and condominium buildings, so those are higher limits still. So what is covered with this NFIP insurance. So coverage A, as I've indicated here, is for your physical building, right? The real property. And the way to think about that versus personal property, which is coverage B, is if you were able to pick your building up off the ground, you shake it, everything that fell out would be personal property, everything that stayed inside would be the building property, the real property. Some exceptions, the refrigerator is considered part of the home, the stove is considered part of the home, even though technically they're not bolted to the ground. Those are considered part of the home property. Personal property, everything that fell out onto the ground, that includes some appliances like washer, dryer, air conditioners, and actually your food in your refrigerator is also insured under the personal property limit, for what that's worth. Only property is covered. If you're a business owner or you work out of your home, loss of use and business interruption is not covered by the NFIP. So only the physical property that you own will be covered. There's other coverages. Coverage C, we'll talk about in just a little bit. That's risk mitigation expenses. And coverage D is what's called increased cost of compliance. So if after a flood, the city or the county or the state says, everyone in a flood zone has to make this improvement, NFIP will cover up to $30,000 of those improvements. So there is some coverage for changes that happen after the fact. Every insurance policy has exclusions. They're either excluding certain property or certain types of loss, right? There are 16 exclusions in an NFIP policy, and they include your porches, cash and currency, money in your home is not covered under NFIP. Cars are not covered, however, they may be covered or likely are covered under your auto insurance. Of course, that's worth checking. Recreational vehicles, RVs, hot tubs, landscaping, trees, and things like that, not covered under the NFIP. Right? Only your home, not the land outside. And like I said, business interruption and loss of use, not covered. If you have earthquake insurance, loss of use is covered, flooded is not. There are also some causes of loss. So sewer backup and seepage are not covered under flood unless flood is what's causing it. Right? A flood is what's called the proximate cause. If that's the first domino to fall to cause your toilets to back up, then that may be covered. But simply backup of water into your home from plumbing and things, not covered. So what does all this insurance cost? Well, as I mentioned before, everyone's needs are different, but we'll talk about a few different tiers of pricing and kind of the groups that these policies fall into. So if you're not in a high-risk flood zone, there is pricing called the preferred risk policy. This table shows an example of pricing for a preferred risk policy. There's for the building and the contents, and then if you're a renter, then you may buy contents only coverage. And you can see there's a difference with how the basement is handled. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And I'm not sure what deductible and what terms this reflects, but this was a sample provided by the NFIP for some flood limits for different reasons. So if you're in a high-risk zone, you'll need to buy high-risk insurance. Typically, your lender will require you to buy it for your building, and the option is up to you if you'll buy it for the contents inside your building. Pricing can vary widely based on the amount of coverage limit you want, which is that table over there on the left, and the deductible. And if you have questions about some of these insurance terms, the handout we gave has got some definitions about how deductibles work and things like that. And like I said, the type of crawl space also factors in. There's an online calculator that I found that we also will have a link to on our website that indicates that this high-risk insurance can cost from $1,000 to in excess of $7,000 a year. So it's not an inexpensive proposition for this insurance. If and when you do decide to examine high-risk insurance, there's a discounting system called the Community Rating System, of which Los Angeles also participates. It's basically a grading for how well the city handles flooding, and we're a Class 7, which can get up to a 15% discount on high-risk insurance. So if and when this ever comes to pass and you're in a position you need to buy high-risk insurance, consider asking about the Community Rating System, because it may offer a discount. Now the grandfather clause. If you buy insurance, if you are outside of a high-risk zone, and you were to purchase insurance now, a preferred risk policy, let me back up. So there's 3 tiers, right? There's the preferred risk policy, which is the least expensive. There's ordinary non-high hazard insurance, which is slightly more expensive. And then there's high risk insurance, which is clearly the most expensive, right? If you're outside of a flood zone, you may be eligible for a preferred risk policy. The pricing is much lower. If you were in a non-high hazard flood zone, a moderate or low hazard flood zone, you're buying a preferred risk policy, spending a few $100s a year, and then a new map gets issued that places your home in a high risk zone. You will be able to purchase not the preferred risk policy anymore, but you'll be able to purchase that ordinary moderate hazard, low hazard flood insurance, which it'll be more expensive than this, but less expensive than that high risk insurance. Okay? Is that making sense? So even though you're in a high risk zone, if you had insurance prior to the new zone being official, you'll be able to purchase it at a lower price through this grandfather clause. The caveats are, you have to have continuous insurance before the new map comes into place. And you cannot have significant remodel after that time, when you can't have, if there's flood damage, the price will go up to the higher policy. This information is all per the NFIP grandfather clause fact sheet that was effective I actually found one from 2016, originally from 2009, but there is one that was issued in 2016. It's on the FEMA website. And you can review it yourself for some of the nuances if this is something that you were to explore. I feel like I didn't do a great job explaining that. I don't know if anybody has a question about that grandfather clause. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just got lost in one little
Yeah.
detail. Are you saying that if you are in preferred risk or ordinary risk, but then the maps gets redrawn and you get kicked into high risk, then you can go back to at least the middle tier?
Exactly.
Okay.
That is what I'm saying. That is the intent of the grandfather clause. If you get rezoned to a high risk area, you won't be able to maintain the preferred risk, but they'll only kind of kick you up into the ordinary flood insurance, not the high hazard. Yes.
Since we're not really sure when this would take into effect, is there a time limit on the grandfather clause? Is it 1 year, 6 months, 2 years?
To my knowledge, there is no time limit.
Just free?
If you want to take advantage of the grandfather clause, you have to have flood insurance in effect before the new map takes effect. And as Karen pointed out, we don't know when that will be. It could be 3 years from now, it could be 10 years from now. The wheels of government turn slowly. So we don't know. Yeah.
Does the grandfather clause apply only to the FEMA insurance?
All this information is specific to the National Flood Insurance Program. This does not speak to private insurance from private insurers. Okay. So we've talked about the coverages. We've talked about some of the exclusions. We're almost done, I promise. There's a few more little quirks that I just want to point out just for your information. When it comes to a detached garage, say you buy the full $250,000 property limit. Only 10% of that can be applied to your detached garage. The most insurance you can have for a detached garage is $25,000, but that reduces the limit allocated to your home by that $25,000. So you can choose to exclude a detached garage rather, if you want to get the maximum limit for your home. That's a consideration you'll have to make yourself. Unenclosed structures and unsecured property is not covered. So anything that floats away in a flood is assumed to have not been secured. So if you've got kind of a 3-walled shed out in your backyard that's got tools and other things of yours, and that all floats away in a flood, it won't be insured because it was assumed to be not secured, and that's one of the requirements of the flood insurance. And think about things that are just left out in the open in your yard, children's toys or whatever it might be, not going to be covered. So the best way to avoid a loss is to not have one in the first place, right? To not have the bad thing happen. So I mentioned coverage C, risk mitigation expenses. The policy allows for up to $1,000 for supplies to mitigate loss exposure. Sandbags, tarps, lumber, things like that, things that you can buy to protect your home. And also up to $1,000 in labor to move your belongings from your home to somewhere outside the flood risk area. And that's based on the federal minimum wage, and it's got to be you or a member of your family doing the moving. But it's up to they'll pay you up to $1,000 for that effort. Okay? In order for this coverage to kick in, basically there needs to be a flood happening somewhere. You can't do it today and then claim that. The rules are specific, I won't get into them, but it says you need to have a flood occurring nearby, though not necessarily on your property, or an evacuation order related to flood. And we'll talk a little bit about getting those evacuation orders, where they come from, because I'm not exactly sure what they do. I kept mentioning crawl spaces. For some reason, a fully enclosed crawl space increases the premium. And the reading I did was basically that once the water gets trapped in an enclosed crawl space, it creates pressure and can cause more damage. So, from my observation, many of us have enclosed crawl spaces. We're not just up on stilts. So, something to consider. There are ways to retrofit a crawl space. And the application of deductibles, I talked about coverage A for your home, coverage B for your belongings. Because they are separate coverages and are applied separately, they also get separate deductibles. So say you buy a policy with a $5,000 coverage A deductible, and a $5,000 coverage B. That means you're gonna, I need you. Oh no! Didn't get it fast enough. Sorry, I got re-logged back in. Yeah, I had you installed, I understand. But the deductibles will apply separately. So, like I said, $5,000 and $5,000, you'll have a $10,000 total deductible for those two coverages. So, something important to know. And there's no deductible on coverage C or coverage D, risk mitigation expenses and the increased cost of compliance. They do not put a deductible on that. All right, so, final thoughts, long list. Be ready. Just because a flood hasn't happened doesn't mean that it can't. We all prepare, hopefully we all prepare for things like a fire in our home or earthquake. Let's add flood to that list. If 1932 or even 1862, which we didn't talk about, was a big event, the river likely wouldn't handle it. 1968 was really, 69 rather, was the carrying capacity of the river. Had that event been worse, we would all be saying we all remember the floods of 1969. You saw those precipitation graphs, and there is a bit of a pattern. Over several decades, we get higher rain events. And as I mentioned, the higher rain events, plus snowmelt, plus the urbanization and the paving of our lands further away means more water is flowing into our storm channels. We don't know when the next flood will happen, but we can say with a high degree of certainty that that high hazard risk exists right now, because the river was not designed to carry a 100-year flood. Practical things you can do around your house right now: take an inventory of your belongings, go room by room, start with everything that's sitting on the floor, and make a list. What it is, what you paid for it. If you can, get the serial numbers, the makes and models. Having that list will not only kind of give you an idea of how much insurance you should buy, how much personal property you have, but also in the event of a loss, in the event of a claim, it'll be invaluable to give to your insurance company or your insurance adjuster to help get you, to make you whole again. And keep receipts where you can, right? Try to buy the right amount of insurance. Make sure you have the right coverages. If you're required to buy insurance, which is that coverage A I mentioned, the real property, they don't throw in the personal property. You need to make sure you're buying exactly what you want, and hopefully no more, right? Every insurance policy comes with what's called a declarations page, and that lists a summary of the coverages that you're getting and the deductibles. We getting the time in? So just make sure you've got coverage A, coverage B if you want it, and so on and so forth. And when you buy too much insurance, you're spending premium money that maybe you don't need to, and if you buy too little, then you won't be made whole again in the event of a loss. There are other risk management opportunities in case of a flood. We talked about the crawl space, potential retrofit. If you've got below grade areas, try to build up around the entrance. Even a few inches may prevent water from entering and filling it up like a bathtub. Make an evacuation plan in the event of a flood warning. That could include putting valuable items up off the ground, boosting your furniture up on wood blocks if possible. Things like that before you evacuate may mitigate the loss. And maintain the drainage around your home. Not just on your home, but if there's a flood, if there's a storm drain, check on it. Make sure that it's not plugged up, because plugging up that drain is going to cause the water to back up later in your neighborhood. Really appreciate you all coming. If you can, spread the word if this information was valuable, if it made sense to you, if I didn't talk too fast. Please share this with your neighbors. Say, hey, there was an interesting flood workshop. My email address is available on the Atwater Village Neighborhood Council website. I'm happy to answer questions where I can. And if this is valuable information, maybe we can do it again. In just a moment, we'll have Rylan come up and give a presentation. Karen is just going to come with a couple more final thoughts.
So, yeah. So with all that said, the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program is run by the federal government, and it is subject to change. So you always want to keep abreast of what's going on with FEMA and the flood insurance program, because congressional changes can happen. How we can make a difference today, though. So there are ways to lower the physical and financial risks of flooding in Atwater Village. We can petition for increased risk management. This is federal funding for the Army Corps O&M, which is operations and maintenance. That would be for the removal of Arundo and sediment to increase water volume in the channel. Petition the city and/or county to sponsor Army Corps feasibility study to do flood wall or other designs. The Army Corps can't act on its own. They need a local sponsor to study flood mitigation options and designs. Petition the city to increase its community response rating. By improving the rating, we increase public safety, flood outreach, and reduce the cost of insurance. As Anthony said, we are a 7, 10 being one being best and 10 being worst. 4, petition the city and county for evacuation plan and warning system. Immediate action is needed to implement a flood warning system and create a comprehensive evacuation plan for Atwater Village, including our equine community. This could include adding flood alerts to our existing systems and/or something similar to Amber Alerts. So, thank you. So Jeff is going to come on up. And by the way, we have a petition for those particular items that we would love for you to sign to get the ball rolling at the Atwater Village Neighborhood Council table, which is the last one where the little dog poop bag holders are.
Okay, great. Okay, so is your head spinning yet? Yeah? So, yeah, lots of great information. Thank you, Karen and Anthony. Quick announcement. A pair of ladies' sunglasses were recovered back at the signing table. Oh, is that you? Okay. There you go. So, no doubt you're going to have a few questions. So, who would like to go first?
Anybody have any questions?
Well, let's pull the people up. We have Chang from the city's NIFP program, which was
And,
part
yeah.
of...
And Genevieve?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a microphone. Any questions about the definitions of the flood zones or the grandfather clause? I feel like I went down through it quickly, or the nature of the exposure. We did that good a job.
How many of you think you're in a flood zone? Okay. So there's a couple of important things that you should know. The process is going to take some time, but if you feel unsafe, you do have the opportunity to get that low cost preferred risk policy. And seriously, if you think it's only going to be like $90,000, $40,000 worth of damage, it's a couple $100 a year. I think the lowest policy starts at $127 a year, and that's not including some admin fees, but they're relatively low for $25 right now for single-family homes. So, for your own peace of mind, that might be something you consider.
Do you just
You could do it two ways. You could call your insurance agent. The FEMA has a list of approved insurance companies, and most companies are approved. Like when I got mine, it was from Hartford, although my home insurance is Mercury Casualty. So you can call up your own insurance agent, because usually they have one or more carriers that they use, and they can get it for you, and it costs the same no matter where you are in the United States for the preferred risk policy. So that might give you peace of mind while we're in this process here.
It is best to use the FEMA website to find the agent. You start with your homeowner's insurance agent, but not all homeowners insurance agents write for FEMA. And even if you write for a certain company, some agents may still not write for FEMA. So it could vary there too.
True, you should be very specific with with that in hand. I think Anthony's handout has it there, and you want to request the FEMA's preferred risk policy. So that's very specific. And with that said, it's probably just easier to go to the SmartGov.
Floodsmart.gov.
Website to get the list, and they do have a list, and that's how I got mine back in 2008.
What was that website?
It's on the handout, floodsmart.gov.
Okay. So if a person is not mandated at the moment and they want to get a little flood insurance to be grandfathered in, do you call your regular insurance agent to get that, or do you, since it's a FEMA, do you go directly to them and tell your insurance agent you've added an outside plan?
I mean, you can approach it either way, right? You can start by calling up your insurance agent and say, hey, do you offer an FIP? And if they say, I'm not familiar with that, I don't do it, then certainly call the National Flood Insurance Program phone number, website, and find from them who in your area, or outside your area for that matter, offers an FIP, and you can purchase it from them. It's a government-administered program, so the different insurance agents shouldn't be charging different amounts, right? This is something like earthquake insurance, which is offered by the California Earthquake Authority, right? It's only your agent that maybe is collecting the money and maybe administering the claims. It's the government that's actually collecting the premium and paying out the losses, right? So that's the nature of NFIP as well. So who you buy it from really shouldn't be. NFIP is in Peter. Yeah, National Flood Insurance Program is what it stands for. Sorry.
So the maps that we saw, we had links to generated in 2016.
Which maps?
The Army Corps maps.
The ones showing the increased hazard?
Yes.
Those were 2016, right?
Yeah, they're from that special floodplain study,
Right.
from Army Corps 2016.
So there are three maps, is what I'm understanding.
Those are being used for the remapping. Yeah, so that study was because of that loss of volume, and that has kicked off the remapping process that we're currently in.
The city looked at the river and said, oh, it's not as good as we thought.
So the change in hazard designation will come from those maps.
Right.
Correct.
And it may be different than what we showed. I mean, the reason why it's taking so long is because FEMA and the city need to do a lot more studies about the carrying capacity. They need to take into account bridges in certain areas. There's a lot of technical stuff that I don't know, but at the end of the day, what we showed you is the mapping that, or is the modeling that the Army Corps did in 2016. By the time they get to the final maps, that may not be exactly how it's reflected. Tim, sorry.
So I know you said that we should make sure our property is protected as much as it can be, and that's on us. And that there are certain things about the river, like the vegetation, that make it run less efficiently. But is it the city or is it Army Corps of Engineers that are actually in charge of making sure that the river is running as efficiently as possible, like clearing debris, clearing vegetation?
Well, let me go to Genevieve on it.
Hi, thank you. First off, this is great to hear. Quick intro, my name is Genevieve Osmeño. I'm from LA County Public Works. Can everyone hear me? Oh,
Microphone.
Yeah, microphone.
There we go.
hello, is that better? Okay, so again, quick intro, my name is Genevieve Osmeño from LA County Public Works. and I also wear the hat for the LA County Flood Control District. So I'm here as a project manager overseeing the LA River Master Plan update, which actually applies to the whole 51 miles. But we know and we recognize that there is this flood risk concern and issue for the 11 miles in the Glendale Narrows. And so I think to answer your question, the LA County Flood Control District does not have direct jurisdiction over the O&M of the 11 miles. That actually is the Army Corps. So, however, you know, us, the Army Corps, City of LA, I think we are wanting the regional agencies that are in charge of flood risk for the watershed. We want to be part of the conversation. We want to hear these discussions, come to events like these, so that we can hear what the community's concerns and what the issues are as we try to address holistically how the whole flood control infrastructure is working. And so for the 11 and for the whole 51 miles, I can express that there's many parts of the LA River that I think would be acknowledged as having very adequate, has the 100-year level protection. Some in the lower river, even beyond that. We know that there are also parts like this 11 miles that, you know, I think are known and recognized to have the lower because of the O&M that I guess hasn't been maintained over the years. Does that answer your question?
You know, I would like to, just before we take another question, I'd like to introduce Chang from the City of Los Angeles National Flood Insurance Program Administration Office, and he can answer some questions for you too.
Sure. My name is Chang Ling. I work with Bureau of Engineering, City of Los Angeles. We are in charge of the national enforcement of the National Flood Insurance Program, and also we also help the city participate in the CRS, which Anthony mentioned before, the community rating system. So this year we're actually doing something called the flood management plan. We are required to do that update every 5 years, and we're actually in the process of trying to get all the members for the steering committees. So we know that we're currently at level 7, and this year when doing the update, we're trying to see if we can analyze what our current score is for the CRS and see if we can improve the score to upgrade to a lower ranking, which is better. Right now we're getting 15% discount. We're shooting to see if we can get 20% or maybe 25%, depending on what kind of efforts we need to put in for the.
5 for 30.
5. Right now we're still doing some assessments. So right now we're at level 7. We hope to get to level 6, possibly 5. So each level that we go down, we get an additional 5% on the discount for the policy, the insurance policy premium. And
I was just going to say, can you give an example of some of the improvements you're trying to make, the city's trying to make?
well, so the CRS, to be in the CRS community rating system for the anti-active program, every year we actually have to opt annual report. So it's actually an ongoing program, like all the newsletter we send out, it has certain scores. The more newsletter we send out, the more points we get. This workshop, if we participate in the workshop, we get certain points. And we also have to analyze all the current communities. Some of them, for repetitive loss property that claims like 4 or more losses in the last 2 years, those will get mapped onto our database. And we are required to send out newsletters to neighbors of those properties to make sure that they're informed that your neighbors is considered repetitive loss properties. So in case you want to do something, you gotta make sure that you let us know, and we have some requirements for them. And the program that we're trying to enforce is also that if your property are falling inside a flood zone, we'll have certain criteria for you when you do remodeling or doing constructions. So that's what we're trying to enforce.
All right, there was some hands for more questions. We'll go back to questions, right?
I'm just curious, it seems like getting legislation would change things dramatically. What is the status with that? Is there anything that's not happening right now, or?
So the comment in question was, vegetation seems to be impacting the carrying capacity of the river significantly. What is the plan? Is the question. Is that accurate?
I can. help.
They spoke to
And again, I'll share my knowledge or what I know, but it is not our agency that's currently directly responsible, but what I understand is that the Army Corps does have some funding to do some maintenance, and I don't know what portion of the funding is used for sediment removal or vegetation removal, but I know that it's not enough, and I think there's constant efforts to try and try to find the funding that they need to do that. But when the channel was originally built and there was no vegetation there, I think like what the information that was shown by Karen and Anthony, it had a 50-year level protection. I think one of the issues or concerns and complicated topics is the habitat and ecology that is currently being supported by the vegetation that is there, even though it's non-native. And I think one of the environmental discussions that is going on is, if we removed it and put more native, is there a way, that could be done to, support the habitat that is still there while trying to phase into sort of a more, because I think right now, like, the arundo and the vegetation that is there, it's very woody, and that's what's taking up the capacity. It basically has cut it in half. If it was replaced with something more grassy and more, not as woody, I think the studies haven't been done yet to show how that could be done in the most environmentally sensitive way. And so I think that's kind of where they're at now right now on that. But I do understand that there is some funding. It's just not enough to get it back to like the original condition.
Nikki, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, that was exactly my question as well. It just seems, feels a little bit like it's defying logic that all these studies and these remapping and this discussion we're having right now is all precipitated by the fact that we've just got a lot of vegetation growing, and it seems like the fundamental issue is that. So the fact that all the resources are being, that helps me understand it a little bit, but it still seems like this asks another question, which is when that channel was first created, they didn't have a plan for the maintenance. Like clearly they saw that this was going to be an issue, but.
One thing worth pointing out is we are one of the few segments of the river that has a sandy bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It is not concreted over at the bottom of our river, and the reason is because of the water table. They couldn't. So we're kind of stuck with the fact that vegetation can grow there. Right? In other portions of the river, there is no vegetation because it's concrete all the way around. Yes, ma'am.
Wait, I have one more thing I'd like to say. There's also the allotment.
Also, the allotment of federal dollars, it isn't decided by us specifically, and that's why we're hoping that you'll sign the petition. But it goes to the Army Corps, from what I understand, versus to the LA River. And then the Army Corps then decides where they spend it. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding how it's allocated.
In DC.
In DC.
Ma'am? That's the Arundo.
That's
Arundo.
They keep trying to get rid of them, and they keep weed whacking and doing what they do. They're not on spray. So it's like, it just, somehow, it would be nice if we could get these entities to work together and to have money that is from our tax dollars allocated into our area so that we don't have to pay thousands of dollars for flood insurance
The bridges and things, I will say, that's outside the scope of what we're here to talk about. I mean, your point is valid, I suppose, but it's not, we can't speak to that, okay? Did you want to talk?
Leaving our dollars into the river, like our city tax dollars into there, if it's not city, I mean, it's very.
It is. It's very convoluted,
You know,
unfortunately.
Yeah, that's, the river committee deals with that on a regular basis, because what we call the river runaround, that's the county's problem, that's the city's storm drain, that's the Army Corps. But essentially, from what I've been told, is that you cannot give money to the Army Corps. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, there might be some kind of special permit that would have to be approved for the Army Corps to accept funds outside its own. But there is a regulatory issue, and I'm going to hand this over to the county to bring up something.
Thank you. I think the one way I can respond to that is I do agree, and we hear that all the time, that we are trying to find better ways to clarify like where the jurisdiction and the limits of maintenance and responsibility begin and end between Army Corps, LA County Flood, and that's just the river corridor, much less the land authority jurisdictions like municipalities like the city of LA, county, unincorporated, and all the other 80 cities. I think I will say that there is an acknowledgement by my agency, and I believe the County Board of Supervisors as well. Just recently they did, and it's the very first step of probably what will be a long process. They sent a letter to the legislature asking the federal government to look into what, and it would still, again, require studies and some analysis, some technical things, like looking at what would be needed to bring the channel back up to a current level before one entity could take it over. But I think one way of helping with some of these jurisdictional issues is to streamline and have one entity in charge of the entire maintenance of the 51 miles. And that term divestiture, if anyone has heard that, that is a process of the federal government, like in the Army Corps, divesting its interest of those 11 miles, and there's other portions of the river and other, rivers in LA County, like even St. Gabriel, where the Army Corps is over, and over to a local entity. But again, I think there's, that's not an easy answer and an easy process, but there is that one letter that's kind of started the process.
Hi. Hello, my name is Mary Rodriguez. I'm the field deputy for City Councilman Mitch O'Farrell, and I cover Atwater Village, Silver Lake, and LA River. And the councilman has recognized the problem that you brought up, and he has introduced a motion to create a EIFD, which is Enhanced Infrastructure Finance District, so that the taxes that are already being collected 1 mile from the river on either side of the river through the city of LA goes right back into the area where the river is for remediation, for maintenance, for infrastructure needs. So that is in the works, and we're hoping that it will be that it will clear very soon. So that is something that we are trying to address. The councilman recognized that when he first came into office. He started it right away. It just takes a long time for these things to come through, but it's something we're working on.
Thank you.
Question over here?
Yeah.
You can.
Oh,
Yeah, no, you can take the microphone, absolutely.
If you want the microphone, you can have it, Melanie.
Hi guys. So Jean-Pierre, this is for you. So as the divestiture process is moving forward, can you speak to how the county is seeing, because you said a single entity, and I expect you don't mean just the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works. So can you speak to that? What does the department see as the state's role in managing the river? And are you looking at that as just the main stem, or are you looking at the tributaries as well? Are you looking at it all as something that would be managed by a joint powers authority? What are the county's thoughts right now?
Can we, I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt. I want to answer that question. We just want to show this Ryland video as well, so maybe if you could briefly answer that question.
Yeah,
we want to show this video, because I know people are starting to go.
People, and Ryland's got a great
It's
program.
super cool. It's a great way to protect yourself.
So just really briefly, it's very, very preliminary, so unfortunately I don't have great specific answers for all the questions. But the process has started. I think LA County Flood Control is willing to discuss being that one entity, but that's probably where we should probably stop it. It's very still preliminary. Hopefully that was short enough. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
That concludes the formal presentation materials. There are folks at these tables. I'll be at the Atwater Village table. Feel free to walk or ask questions, collect some of the materials around flood hazard and flood prevention. Thanks a lot for coming, everybody. Hope this was helpful.